Well, things are getting pretty bad. I was very uneasy yesterday making any forecasts one way or the other because everything was very much up in the air. And I mean, it still is today. Everything is going to be up in the air for a very long time. But I have a little bit better idea of what direction we're moving in now. We're seeing more and more coming out, uh, which supports what I was expecting yesterday, and that is a lot of lawsuits in many states over the conduct of this election. It has become clear that as Rudy Giuliani is now making the case publicly, and this is going to be, their case in court, there was a widespread election fraud system or plan throughout many states in this country. And I'm very hesitant to say something like that. Well, what I'm saying is that is the Trump campaign's case. That's what I'll say, because I don't want YouTube to censor me. But as someone like me who has seen real election fraud be attempted and committed firsthand, and others who have seen such things, such as Robert Barnes, if you're not following him on Twitter at Barnes Law, he's real good at explaining this stuff. He and Rich Barris were talking about this in the weeks leading up to this, the last couple of months. They've been talking about the potential for fraud in this election and what it would look like, and we're seeing that play out. And it's what I expected to, but I think everyone is shocked by the degree to which there is potential fraud in this election. It's astounding. I thought that what we would see is if the election came down to one state with a tipping, there was the tipping point, like Pennsylvania or Michigan, that there would be some fraud in a county in that state trying to throw the election the way of Joe Biden. In reality, what I'm seeing is what looks like election fraud in not only Pennsylvania, not only Michigan, not only Wisconsin, but also Georgia and Nevada. We are seeing evidence that dead people are voting. And this is people who are observing the ballot count. We're taking screenshots of the computers showing the voters and their registration with their birth date on there. And I think it was Barris who looked up a particular voter because somebody else had posted a screenshot of this. He checked it in in his voter file, the L2 voter file, which he pays for as a pollster. He has access to that. And this was a man in Wayne County, Michigan, from Detroit, born in 1902, died in 1984, who just cast a ballot in this year's election. That ballot of his was returned on, I believe, September 11th of this year. And so what that would seem to suggest to me is that this was done ahead of time. There were a bunch of ballots they found, from their dirty voter rolls in a lot of these counties where they have people who don't live there anymore, people who don't vote very often, people who are dead, who they expected were not going to come out and actually cast their own ballot. They made up fake ballots for all these people, cataloged them, or put them away in a safe place for safekeeping in case they needed them. And now what we're seeing is that on election night, when Donald Trump looked like he was handily winning a lot of these states in the Rust Belt, such as Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, looked like he was doing very well. All of a sudden, the state decided to say, you know what, we're done counting for tonight. We're going to come back tomorrow. Rather than finishing counting all the ballots tonight on election night, we're just going to start back up fresh in the morning. And this is what a lot of the mainstream left were supposedly warning about as the red mirage, to where it looked like Trump was winning, but actually he's way down. So once they come back and count all the real ballots, we know that Trump will lose. And we were hearing this from I think it was Hawkfish, was the Democratic consulting firm that was sort of floating this idea out there of the red mirage, which has been propagated by the media. And that to me would seem to indicate a bit of coordination, because what we're seeing is not a legitimate sort of red mirage scenario where they count all of the election day ballots, and then they start counting all the absentee ballots, and it closes, and and Trump's lead evaporates, and then Biden overtakes him. Yes, we do have a lot of mail-in / absentee ballots and early ballots that lean towards Biden, that are closing the gap, or closed in the case of, well, now pretty soon to be all of these states, closed Trump's lead. But we also have a lot of ballots mixed in there and irregularities that very clearly are not genuine, and not just anecdotal evidence such as dead people voting. Those things are important. They demonstrate the principle that there are fraudulent ballots being cast, but that is not evidence to suggest a widespread phenomenon. What does suggest a widespread fraud is the overvoting for Joe Biden. And what that is it's Joe Biden's massive overperformance relative to down ballot candidates in these select states, these important swing states. Generally speaking, in Ohio, in Florida, in Texas, and all these other places, Joe Biden in a given jurisdiction is going to perform pretty similar to the down ballot Democrat candidates in that same jurisdiction. The Senate and congressional candidates are going to track pretty close to Joe Biden. Is it true that some people just go in there and just vote for president and don't take the time to fill out the rest of the ballot? Yes. But that's a small number of people. And those people are spread out across the entire sample of all the ballots. What we saw on election night, in the middle of the night, when after all the observers had went home, we saw in at least Wisconsin, Michigan, and potentially other states that I don't know about, a sudden gap up for Biden. 130,000 votes or so came in both Wisconsin and Michigan that were all for Biden. And these ballots, not only were they all for Joe Biden, but they were not for any other candidate. So if you look at the Senate race, Gary Peters did not gap up at the same time Joe Biden did. John James maintained his lead over Joe Biden until yesterday. They finally called it for Gary Peters. And in Wisconsin, there's not a Senate race. I'm not sure, but if you look at the congressional candidates, Democrat congressional candidates in Wisconsin got significantly less votes than Joe Biden, and especially when you look at the number of votes that Donald Trump got compared to Republican congressional candidates, it obviously tracks very closely. And so what does this suggest? Well, if you see, if you're trying to rig an election, and you see that organically you don't have enough votes to win, and you want your candidate to win, what do you have to do? You have to make up a bunch of fake ballots, essentially, fraudulent ballots, to push your candidate over the edge. Now, if you're doing this and you're trying to create, potentially thousands of ballots, are you going to take the time to fill out the entire ballot? No, you're just going to bubble in that first line to try and win that important race, because you're trying to move quickly, because if you wait too long, if you wait, for example, 2 weeks or 3 days, as some of these states are doing, or as some of them could, but actually aren't, they're going to erase Trump's lead in less time than that. If they wait too long, the longer they wait, the less realistic this looks. It looks more like what happened in Florida in 2018 when Broward County refused to report the results and kept saying, no, we keep finding new ballots. And you saw people pulling up in their cars and opening up the trunk and carrying, handfuls of ballots into the supervisor of elections office. They were being hauled out of the back of Brenna trucks, which, is illegal, by the way. It's against Florida law. They have to be, they were breaking the chain of custody. We're seeing this all over, only in these states where Donald Trump initially had a very big lead, and then, his lead evaporated. We're only seeing this kind of stuff in Nevada, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And, of course, the Trump campaign's observers are getting kicked out of the offices where they're counting these ballots. And there's that viral video from Detroit of them boarding up the windows so that the observers could not see in. We also saw around 4 a.m., right before they injected that 130,000 ballots that all went to Joe Biden and nobody else. There is video from multiple sources or there might be video from only one source, but multiple witnesses who were staking out the whatever they call it, the supervisor of elections, the clerk of court, whatever, in Detroit, and they saw the vehicles pull up, and then the poll workers or the elections officials carting in big chunks and chunks of ballots, which apparently we're left to surmise are those 130,000 ballots that were counted in the middle of the night. Now, if one thing's clear here, this election has lost all integrity in these states. You can't have these kinds of things where observers are being denied access to ballots that are being counted, where we don't have any record of the chain of custody of ballots, where they're just finding ballots out of nowhere and counting them. We don't know where these ballots came from. We don't know who cast them. And this is why the Trump campaign is suing in most of these states. And this election will ultimately come down to the courts, just like I said yesterday. Today, there was a very interesting witness that the Trump campaign had at their press conference in Las Vegas. It was an older woman who lives with someone else. She has a roommate. And her ballot was stolen. In Nevada, they mailed out ballots to everyone. Whether you requested one or not, you got a mail-in ballot in Nevada. So when she didn't vote by mail. She never has. She went to vote on election day, and they told her, "You've already voted. You can't vote now." And so what ended up happening was when her ballot came in the mail, somebody stole it out of the mailbox. Both her and her roommate had their ballots stolen. And so you don't think that in a place as corrupt as, say, Clark County, Nevada, that political operatives don't know when all of the mail-in ballots are being delivered into which houses so that they can go and try and steal a bunch of ballots, which they can then hold back. They can fill in for Joe Biden ahead of time, hold them back, and wait till election day to see if they're going to need to use them to essentially rig the election in Biden's favor. I mean, I'm trying to tread as lightly as possible here, but this is just so blatant that there's not much else I can say. I can't give them the benefit of the doubt in this, because what's there to doubt? It's pretty obvious. It seems to me that what they're betting on here is that Trump wouldn't call them out in a Nixon-style concession, when Nixon knew in 1960 that Kennedy stole the election, but Nixon didn't challenge it. So that's the first thing that they might be betting on, which I think there's a slim chance of that. Trump is a fighter. He's going to challenge this. He already has. The second thing is they're betting that the media will just help them cover it up, because Orange Man is bad. And so if Orange Man is saying that the election was stolen, then that can't be true. And the media is so far going along with it, saying that it's ridiculous, that Trump is challenging all this. So what Trump has to do is he has to make this case himself to the voting public, to Congress, and to the state legislatures. Because as Mark Levin pointed out on Twitter today, the U.S. Constitution says that the state legislatures choose how to appoint electors to the Electoral College. All of these states choose to hold elections to see whatever the popular will is in their state, and that's how they choose to apportion their electors. But it's still ultimately the state legislature that has that constitutional authority. The state legislature is who selects members of the Electoral College and sends them to Washington to cast votes for the presidency. And the Republican Party happens to control the state legislature in all of these states that I've been discussing: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Georgia, but not Nevada. All have Republican state legislatures. And so if it's so clear like this that there was fraud committed, and if the Trump campaign can demonstrate to these folks, I think that they can at least make this case in Wisconsin, which is all he needs to win, by the way, unless Georgia slips somehow. But I think Georgia is, again, one that's so close to where if they can prove fraud in Georgia, that would be enough to overturn it. If he can make the case to the state legislatures, to the Republican state legislatures, in at least Georgia and Wisconsin, if not the other three states, or, well, Arizona I think is going to go Trump. But anyway, the legislatures can still send their electors to Washington to vote for Trump. if they think that that's the way that the election went. Now, do I think that that's a smart thing to do? Is that a smart last resort? That's obviously not optimal. Nobody will recognize it. Or I shouldn't say nobody, but a lot of people will not see that as legitimate. But again, as of right now, the vote is not legitimate. I don't think that there's any path that we come out of now, no matter what the final result is, where we have a president and people accept that as legitimate. People didn't accept Trump as legitimate in 2016. People didn't even accept George W. Bush as legitimate in 2000. And this is far, far less messy than 2000. And by the way, in 2000, George W. Bush was ahead the whole time. Gore was the one trying to overturn the election night results in 2000. Gore was trying to make the case to the Supreme Court that people who voted for Pat Buchanan actually meant to vote for Al Gore, which is preposterous. He wanted votes for Pat Buchanan to count for him. So buckle up. The 79 days of hell is underway. I believe we're on day 2, so we have 77 days of hell left until the inauguration of the next president, whoever that's going to be, and we are a long way from knowing who that's going to be. This is easily going to be the most contested election since 1876, and so we'll just have to keep watching to see how it plays out. If you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one, so I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.